Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. I am Amani Jamal. I am the Dean of the school, and I'm so happy to welcome you to this installment of our Dean's Leadership Series. Our discussion today is the second of a two-part series focusing on rising levels of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. 2 months ago, we examined anti-Semitism, and today our focus will be on Islamophobia. The topic remains all too timely. According to a report released last month by the Council on American Islamic Relations, more than 8,600 people filed complaints regarding anti-Muslim and anti-Arab incidents in 2024. This number was 7.4% higher than the year before, and the highest since the group began compiling data in 1996. For our discussion on combating Islamophobia, we turn to two distinguished experts who will draw on their academic research and frontline policy experience to examine the roots of anti-Muslim bias, its global implications, and effective strategies for fostering inclusion and resilience in an age of rising hate. Dr. Dalia Fahmy is a political scientist and an expert on Islamophobia and U.S. foreign policy. She's a member of the faculty of Long Island University, where she directs the program in international relations and diplomacy. Previously, she was a senior fellow at the Center for Foreign Policy and a visiting scholar at the Center for the Study of Genocide and Human Rights. Dr. Fahmy's scholarship includes multiple books and journal articles, and she has served as an expert source for numerous media outlets. She has won several academic awards and fellowships for her research, including the prestigious Kliegman Prize in Political Science. Welcome, Dalia. The Honorable Farah Pandith, the first ever U.S. Special Representative to Muslim communities, is a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, foreign policy strategist, and former diplomat. Ms. Pandith, a pioneer in the field of countering violent extremism, has been a political appointee in the Barack Obama, George W. Bush, and George H.W. Bush administrations. She left government in early 2014 for Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. She served on the Secretary of Homeland Security's Homeland Security Advisory Council from 2015 to 2017, where she also chaired the HSAC Subcommittee on Countering Violent Extremism and delivered a report in June 2016. Delivered a report in June 2016. Her book, How We Win: How Cutting-Edge Entrepreneurs, Political Visionaries, Enlightened Business Leaders, and Social Media Mavens Can Defeat the Extremist Threat, was published in 2019. Ms. Pandith is also a public speaker and a global advisor, driving efforts to counter extremism through new programs and initiatives. It's such an honor to have you as well. Welcome to our school. Our discussion is part of the school's Constructive Dialogues initiative, which seeks to bring together people from a wide variety of backgrounds and perspectives to engage in respectful conversations in hopes of finding common ground. Thank you to Dr. Fahmy and Ms. Pandith for joining us, and to everyone in attendance for today's event, which was made possible by the Johnson Leadership Fund. In addition to introducing discussion, I have the great privilege of moderating today's discussion. So why don't we get started? Please join us. Thank you. Thank you. Am I mic'd? Okay. Thank you so much for joining us. It's really a great pleasure to have you here today. So let's just dive into it. Can you please sort of contextualize and tell us a little bit more about the state of Islamophobia in the US today?
So when we think about Islamophobia, usually we talk about it as the irrational fear of Islam and Muslims. But there's something else happening here. So Islamophobia is really not just the irrational fear of Islam and Muslims, but it's meant to marginalize Muslims from civic and political life. So there's actually a political objective when we talk about what is Islamophobia. Islamophobia today, in the terms of the marginalization of Muslims from civic and political life, is much more intense than it was 1 week after 9/11. In the public repertoire, for example, if we look at Pew feeling thermometers, on the kind of the words Islam and Muslims. We know that today there's a 70% negative association with the word Islam for Americans. Of course, higher for Republicans than Democrats, but still there's this negative association. And again, much more intense than it was after 1 week after 9/11. But if we think about how it's translating into kind of the public, but also the civic discourse, when we track it in terms of like 2016 up until the 2018, 2020 terminology, you saw what used to be discussed in the periphery now coming from within the heart of the political establishment, right? When you had folks running for office saying, for example, Muslims should not be cabinet members, Muslims can't be trusted, that America is a Judeo-Christian nation. They start to see this language of Muslims do not belong, right? They're new and they do not belong. And if you look at it in juxtaposition to what's happening, not just here in the United States, in Europe and Australia, it's now being these discussions on integration versus assimilation versus this one population that refuses to change. And so this kind of growing threat of Islam and Muslims, what we used to talk about in the kind of cartoon Aladdin version, has now become part of the mainstream of the conversation of how we look at Islam and Muslims, not just in America, but throughout the world.
First, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for having me. I don't think I've seen a prettier spring day, so I appreciate the work that you did to get me here to see such a beautiful campus. I want to take a step back because I agree with what Dalia said in terms of the definition that I think we're using today. I have usually pushed back against the term Islamophobia because I really don't know what it means. Every audience that I go to talks about it in a different way. And it makes it really hard to talk about what it is and what people are feeling and how policy people can make decisions about what needs to happen. For the purposes of today, the way I'm talking about it is really anti-Muslim hate showing up in a wide variety of ways, including some of the ways that were just described. But I also want to go a little bit further back as well, because if we're talking about the United States and anti-Muslim hate, I think it's important. I'm seeing most of the people in the audience are of a generation that is not mine. So I just want to get a sense from you on whether or not you're Gen Z, whether you're millennials. Don't be shy. Yeah, okay. That gives me, that's helpful because, and the reason I'm saying that is because I think the US landscape around what Islam is, who a Muslim is, what it's all about, where Muslims come from, and importantly, for those of you who are American, when did Islam come to America? Are critical questions we have to ask as we think about the changes that have happened in the US landscape. For those of us who were in the United States in 1979, we know that there was a definite shift that happened in terms of the context of who is a Muslim and what is Islam, because people saw what was happening in Iran. They saw the burning of the US flag that was on television sets all over our country and the world. I go fast forward to 1989 with the Salman Rushdie fatwa, which mobilized a very different kind of opinion about what that religion is, what they actually do, what they believe. And that's important because these seeds that were planted in terms of an understanding of A, violence, B, hating the West, C, a foreigner kind of approach, really smacked of difference. It smacked of, you can't belong here. This isn't your place. And the reason why I'm saying this is because for those of you who know, Islam was part of the United States before the United States was the United States. It came here with the enslaved people. And so when you're talking about how the US perceives a Muslim, it's not built on historic fact. It's built on events that have happened. I've named a couple. There are many more. Obviously, 9/11, we'll get into that, changed things dramatically in the last 2 decades. But that sense of not knowing enough, looking at somebody as the other, was not as present before 1979 in the way that we're seeing it today. So I'm pained to tell you that as we look at the United States and we see what's happening in our country, And around the world, frankly, it's not just Europe, the way Muslims are perceived is based on images that they see on their smartphone, the dis and misinformation sometimes that they see on their feeds, and also a decade upon decade narrative that has been built around Muslims cannot be compatible with democracy. Muslims are somehow uncivil. Muslims must use violence in the name of everything that they are as they speak about their identity. So forgive me for going as long as I did.
No, please.
But I just want to sort of set the stage in terms of what it is that I think is the beginning point as we were talking about these issues.
No, and I really, really appreciate the historical lens. It's really important to understand that this idea that Muslims are always foreign or do not belong, or they have a value system that clashes with American value system or a Western value system has really been at the heart of Islamophobia for decades. It was interesting. I was at a dinner the other day, and the conversation sort of focused or veered towards when we used to talk about threats to America, we used to think about, oh, those outsiders coming in, more or less Muslims with their values. But today there's a lot of concern about the threats coming from within the American establishment itself in terms of what we're seeing going on within the country. I think, Udi, you were in that conversation as well. That was a lunch, actually. So, but nevertheless, going back to this topic of Islamophobia, the comments that I often got, at least for our earlier generation, and I know when I talk about Islamophobia with my kids, we're in two different worlds. And if I'm just using my own positionality, because there was always this discourse, well, if only Muslims did X, Y, Z, things would be better for them. And my kids who were born and raised here, I was born and raised here, but still I had more of a bicultural sort of experience because I lived in Palestine for about 10 years. My kids reject that, from the bat, which they just, they sort of call that xenophobic, racist, discriminatory. They will not tolerate that. How do you guys deal with that with your communities that you engage, with Muslim communities that you engage and represent?
There was this moment after the Charlie Hebdo fiasco where there was a cartoon, led to a lot of violence in Europe, where the solution that was proposed was we just need a Muslim sitcom, right? We need a Muslim Cosby show. As if, we're not talking about deeply entrenched issues here, but we're not talking about structural racism. I mean, ultimately, when we talk about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia today, we're talking about the racialization of these categories. It's not just about Muslim hate or Jewish fear. It's about something else, something much deeper, the kind of intersection of the racialization. If you take a wider view and we kind of treat this as a newer phenomenon. So when President Obama was running for office and there was questions about his middle name, right? Hussein, what does this mean? Can we have a Muslim in office? Can they be trusted? It wasn't the first time this conversation was had. So in the debate to ratify the U.S. Constitution in 1776, when the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists came together to debate them, William Lancaster says, I don't know how this country is going to work in 500 years. So he's looking into the future, right? A papist might occupy that chair. A Mohammedan might take it. And this chair he's talking about is a seat in the presidency of the United States. This was a debate about whether we should have a religious litmus test. And so here in the kind of discussion to ratify the Constitution is this conversation of what about the Muslims, right? And so in the beauty of this is that there is no religious litmus test. And so when we talk about the defining moments in U.S. construction of identity, even if it's 1776 ratify the U.S. Constitution, is this debate about what is this country going to look like? And it forces everyone to kind of come to an agreement of we don't know, and that's okay. And so this idea, this fear of Muslims, the fear of Muslimhood, it's not of Islam, it's of Muslimhood, because we know, for example, after 9/11, the first victim of Islamic violence was a Sardar, a sick man in a turban, right? And so it's that the proximity to Muslimhood that's become weaponized and turned into a caricature of we don't want those people, right? And again, it's so antithetical to our values. It's so against what we talked about in the kind of ratification of the Constitution. So I think it's these moments that are really important for us to focus on, to think about if that's where we were and that was part of our founding, and we talk about it like it's settled, right? Why is it so strong in this narrative of othering today that is part of politics and that allows elected officials to actually get into office, right? Islamophobia has become the most publicly acceptable form of racism that leads to successful campaigns.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Dalia. Farah.
Well, one of the things I will say is that this idea of fear of the other, what's not comfortable to you, what you haven't studied, what you don't know, is not exclusive, obviously, to Islam or Muslims. We have seen our country do that throughout our history. I grew up in Massachusetts. I was born in northern India, but I grew up in Massachusetts. And this, you know, the Irish and the Italians and the Poles will tell stories about what it felt like for their ancestors in that town, in that city, excuse me. And I'm not putting aside the horror of what we're dealing with today about the other, but I want to be really clear. This conversation about anti-Muslim hate, Islamophobia, has to be seen in terms of a larger change in America, where politicians and other kinds of leaders use the other as a method to win over votes and to make sort of the fear tactics that we have seen happen. It's vile and disgusting, obviously. But I would say that you know, I mean, in Switzerland, you will remember the minaret ban. Why did they do that? They did that because that's not what Swiss villages were supposed to look like. We have church steeples, we don't have minarets. The banning in other parts of Europe of wearing a headscarf or wearing a niqab, because that's not what you're supposed to look like if you belong here. I have had conversations, can I get a little personal for a moment?
Please.
My family is from Kashmir. I was born in Srinagar. I grew up in Massachusetts and went to a private school outside of Boston, K through 12. I thought very proudly of my heritage. I didn't wear it on my sleeve all day, every day. Not that that was good or bad, I just didn't. I was never, ever asked, ever, about my faith. I didn't drink alcohol in high school. Nobody asked me why. If they kind of looked at me funny at a party, I'd say it's a religious thing. They didn't ask me what religion I meant. Today, the first question in the room, I mean, during my book tour, I have to tell you, in 2019, having served in government for our country for 3 presidents, I had people in the audience say to me, how do they allow you to work at the White House when you're not American? Now, this is not a shock to anybody. We know what's going on in our country. This was 2019. But I'm saying this because this idea of finding a victim, finding an easy target is not new. That's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make is your piece about, your very important fact about the change and the rise of what's happening today. And I think one of the reasons that, that I think we have to find solutions to this now is not just because it's vile and horrific that we're doing this, and this is not the country that we are in. Read George Washington's letter to the Hebrew congregation. Mm-hmm. I mean, let us talk about who we were as a nation. So this change that's happened, that there's a right way and a wrong way to be an American, is relative. It's not new, but its form is new, and it's new for 3 main reasons. One, it's been tolerable. There hasn't been a pushback by Americans in a big way. Secondly, we have devices that are attached to us whose algorithms make it really fun and wonderful to hate another thing. You like dogs, I like cats. You like Muslims, I like this. I mean, whatever it is, it's hate, us versus them. And the third, importantly, is that there's now a politicization on a level that I don't think people understood before. And so while we saw, and I hope we talk about 9/11, dramatic change after 9/11 about the generations that grew up understanding themselves and their identity. It shifted this idea of what to be fearful of domestically and internationally in a different way. And I think that's important. And I think it's important because here in the United States, obviously we never had something that dramatic and horrible happen internally as we did on 9/11. But what we saw as a response for the generations that grew up after 9/11, for Muslims, whether it's in our country or around the world, is this question around showing up and showing their identity in a different way. And that changed the cultural, societal norms in such a way that it also magnified, oh my gosh, what's going on here? I'm seeing more Muslims. Maybe you were, maybe you weren't. Have you gone into a hospital recently and had somebody, treat you? I mean, American doctors who have of Muslim descent have been part of this country for decades and decades. I'm using one field, obviously there are many more.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that heightened attention to the idea that I didn't see them before and now I'm seeing them now adds to that. So I feel very strongly that as we think about what has happened with all kinds of hate, that it will continue to happen in our country and around the world if we do not come back to normal as Americans to say, what are our values? Where did we start? What do we believe? And this is a dramatic point I'm about to make, and I'm sorry I have to say it. In the work that I did in both the Bush and Obama administrations, I had to engage with Muslims around the world. I had to go into communities and talk to them about being Muslim. Hear what they were saying about what it felt like to be a Swiss Muslim or a Malaysian Muslim. Okay. After 9/11, I could go to Europe and go to Norway or Italy or Germany and Belgium. Well, whatever the Muslim group I was talking to. And I could say, in America, as a Muslim, I can walk freely, I can not be fearful, and that there are synagogues and churches and temples and mosques on the same street. That's who we are as Americans, and we celebrate pluralism. I said that after 9/11. I said that in the Obama administration. I cannot say that today because the change that has happened in America is so severe around fear. We are not talking about anti-Semitism today, but I really want to say to you, the idea that we have to have police officers in front of synagogues across America because of the rise of anti-Semitism in our nation should upset absolutely everyone. It doesn't matter if you're Jewish or not Jewish. Ditto churches and mosques, and you mentioned the Sikh community in America, which I think is important to state. If you quote, look Muslim, and I don't know what that means, but if you talk to the Sikh community in America or you talk to the Hindu community in America, there has been hate for their communities as well. So we have to decide who we are as Americans, right, and stand by our values so that we protect everyone.
Thank you for that, and that's a really critical point. And you talked about 9/11, and I remember 9/11 vividly, right? And there were many conversations among the Muslim community. How does the Muslim community in the U.S. respond to it? I mean, 9/11 was so horrific. I remember for weeks, Muslims wouldn't leave their homes, right? They were worried about backlash and violence. And then there was a lot of organization around what it means to be Muslim and how can Muslims be protected in the United States as a minority group. And there were a lot of conversations about, okay, how do we show up? How do Muslims present themselves at the table? And in many ways, if you sort of look at the 2 decades after 9/11, if I may, you were able to go to Europe and use the U.S. as an example. Islamophobia persisted, but nevertheless, we began to see more people going into public office,
Yep.
a lot more representation, a lot more commitment. Universities also, understanding the need to educate more about Islam and different cultures. So there was this moment of let's, as a community, better understand and then better position Muslims to succeed. And we saw a lot of also sort of interfaith and cross-religious cooperation. And, you know, and the epitome of it was 2016, if I may, when the Muslim ban was imposed. You saw mainstream America go out to airports to make sure that Muslims could come back in this country. Um, in many ways, those efforts backfired. So the last 2 decades, although, you know, there's a painful story of Islamophobia, you could also sort of mark the successes. So we can talk more about what 9/11 meant. But I also know, so I'm just going to fast forward to bring in two different topics. Then we get to October 7th in 2023, and the issue of Palestine emerges. And for many who are watching what's happening in the Muslim landscape in America, they'll say, well, the levels of Islamophobia have skyrocketed because of what's happening between Palestine and Israel. And I go back to that 9/11 moment, right, where community organizers were coming together and leaders, and as they were trying to figure out how Muslims can represent themselves in America, there was a deliberate debate among Muslim American leaders. I was still very young, but just listening. But there was a deliberate debate that for Muslims to succeed in America, they would be advised to drop the issue of Palestine. That this issue of Palestine is a liability that's going to hold back Muslims. And a divide began to emerge within the Muslim community, as you can imagine. And I wouldn't say it was based on ethnicity. You just had different commitments across the board. And at least for that decade after 9/11, there was a lot of focus on Iraq and the U.S. invasion of Iraq, but Palestine sort of withered away from the public statement, or at least from the public consciousness, at least among the Muslim community. And then something like October 7th happens, Palestine is back on everybody's mind, and then levels of Islamophobia have skyrocketed. So we can spend a little bit of time about 9/11, what that meant for the Muslim community, Islamophobia or anti-Muslim hate, but then also get to the current moment on this issue of Palestine. And I just put in my question there, like you do see that you talked about it being politically advantageous for our political establishment to peddle Islamophobia and Islamophobic tropes. What I also so completely agree, and I'm worried about that, but I also worry about when our administration is only privileging a discourse on anti-Semitism, which to your point, we need to combat and we'd be dedicated to, and that's wrong. But by doing that and still sabotaging Muslims, if you may, in their discourse, they are also producing this gap of hatred between two communities who otherwise were working together, who were combating Islamophobia and anti-Semitism simultaneously, because the sources of that, at least historically and traditionally in American society, come from the same pockets. So I'm sort of really sort of discouraged by all of this in a way, although fighting and combating all forms of hate is essential. So I put a lot there, but I'm going to give that back to you.
So I was in grad school at NYU during 9/11. My brother worked at the World Trade Center complex. It was a crazy time because we couldn't mourn our losses as Muslims. We couldn't mourn our city being attacked. We couldn't mourn our country because we were on the defense, right? It was a really kind of transformative moment, not just for the country, but for myself because of the position we were in. But, you know, to his credit, and we don't give President Bush II lots of credit, to his credit, he did come out and say very emphatically, we are not at war with Islam. You go check on your Muslim neighbors, right? Walk with them to the grocery store. That stuff matters, right? That top-down narrative about we're in this together actually did matter at that time, right? And so if we think about the kind of change in narratives that we have today of, you know, Muslims are the enemy coming from the seat of the presidency, rather than the president saying, check on your Muslim neighbors because we're not at war with Islam. Islam didn't do this, is a very different moment. So within the Muslim community at the time, there was not just an abandonment of Palestine, there was a conscious decision to step away from foreign policy. We're going to focus on domestic politics. We're going to focus on domestic politics because foreign policy is not getting us anywhere. And the issue of Palestine is too much of a wedge. And so that strategy did, you know, whether on purpose, but it did take hold for a very long time. And I think now we're seeing the after effects of what does it mean to distance for such a long time from foreign policy. But the issue of 2015, 2016. So for example, I live not too far from Westfield, New Jersey. Just after the president was elected, we start to see Westfield is a very affluent Jewish, has a very large affluent Jewish constituency. There was a swastika spray painted on the synagogue. And I remember, it was a moment where you show up for each other, right? And then after that, we start to see the Tree of Life massacre, right? And then the Christchurch massacre. And Rabbi and I were really like, I'm sick and tired of us showing up for one another in moments of crisis, right? Where there's been mass violence. What does it really mean to stand together? And that's what I think is going to force us to have a deeper conversation right now, where it's not just about we have each other's back, but what is the way forward? And the way forward has to be put in a conversation as we are going to refuse to let Islamophobia and anti-Semitism be weaponized against one another. What happened in the airports in 2016, people flooding to the airports to celebrate the arrival of Muslims. I mean, how bizarre is that? It's not lost on me, the irony. But when Muslim Ban 2.0 happened, there wasn't an authorization to have a protest. And people protested anyway, Muslim Ban 2.0. And some of the first people to be arrested were rabbis. And then when they were interviewed, they said, we know what this stuff leads to, right? Today, we do not have that unity standing in the face of oppression. We are actually standing against one another. And I think that's the deeper conversation we have to have. Why is it that Islamophobia and anti-Semitism have been weaponized against one another? Or for example, in Germany, to prove that you are not an anti-Semite, you have to make some pretty Islamophobic claims. And so this is the deeper conversation we have to have. We often use Islamophobia as an umbrella to talk about Palestine, right? But it's actually not about Islamophobia. Anti-Palestinian hate and anti-Arab hate and Islamophobia do have common origins, but they actually are very, very different. The idea of anti-Palestinian hate, the way we see it depicted in movies historically, right, is a little different than anti-Muslim hate. Anti-Palestinian racism is tied to the anti-Palestinian culture. I'm not talking about food, right? But we're talking about culture that is tied to narratives of liberation. And that is why it's important for us to investigate why is it that we gouge anti-Palestinian racism with the kind of cover Islamophobia, right? Because we actually need to talk about not just the racialization, but how sometimes we can actually not be talking about the elephant in the room. And so while we're saying a lot and talking about a lot, I think we are in a critical moment in the country where what we saw post-2016 seems to be impossible today. We're all groups, right? So, even if you think about the Women's March, right, happening, well, where's today's Women's March? Where's the unity of all people and all organizations in the face of what seems to be even more difficult than 2016, right? It's that groups are actually blaming one another, right? Whether, Black men or Muslims and Arabs or, you guys did this to us. You broke the coalition, right? This narrative of positing groups against one another is probably one of the biggest tests of our time because it's actually against the fabric of what does it mean to be America. And so it's our division, not just of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, but of all groups today, that is forcing us to think about what is our future really going to look like if we're going to take the countering of all forms of hate seriously, because what I know is that Islamophobia is built on anti-Semitism, built on anti-Black racism, built on xenophobia, built on LGBTQ discrimination. And if we want to talk about justice, it's not just for us, right? It has to be done all in tandem. And so what happened to all those coalitions, right? That's the deeper question facing us today.
There's a lot there. I want to go back to your 9/11 point about and say three things. The first is this point about the coalitions that were developed post 9/11 were really powerful, and it's hard to talk about now because it seems quite cute because things have gotten so bad. But it is very important to understand that different communities stood up for each other. we have to separate foreign policy choices and your opinion on foreign policy with some of the actions of bringing a country together. And so I want to go to your point about President Bush. And yes, I did work for him, but I want to make a couple of key points. That position of steering the country in a particular way to remind us who we are and what we stand for cannot come from only the president. It has to come from other parts of society as well. But the president's role is obviously essential. So when he 2 or 3 days, or actually, I'm sorry, the day after 2 days after 9/11, he goes to the Islamic Center of Washington and gives a really powerful speech, which I urge you to download and listen to. Yeah. Yes, he underscored very importantly that there's a distinction between the actions of these violent terrorists and the religion of Islam. We didn't talk, I mean, yes, all these other things were happening in America, but we were fighting a terrorist organization called Al-Qaeda that was using Islam for their nefarious ends. We got a second dosage of that with a group called ISIS, okay? So when we think about the American narrative of what the US policy was working on, yes, your point is correct. The two-state solution was not something that they were working towards in the way that perhaps they could have if Al-Qaeda had not attacked us. But what we were pivoting towards was making sure on the counterterrorism side that terrorist organizations were not setting up an us versus them so that they were recruiting young people under the age of 30 all around the world. And that's where the efforts went into the work of what's happening with Muslims, how can we build resilience so that the bad guys can't come in and try to lure them in. Let us remember that technology was not what it was after 9/11. And so we were beginning to understand the impact of algorithms. Facebook was the cool thing, if you can believe that. And so we were learning as policymakers, but the steps that were taken by both President Bush and President Obama to be very clear about the distinction between violence in the name of Islam, to be very clear about the fact that pluralism was important to us as a nation. Very importantly, President Bush didn't just go to the Islamic Center of Washington after 9/11. He also went towards the end of his term on the 50th anniversary of the laying of the cornerstone of that mosque by which president? Eisenhower. President Eisenhower gave land to the Islamic Center of Washington because there was no mosque in Washington. And he laid down that cornerstone. You should listen to that speech as well. So designing and crafting a very careful and very clear position that while we were going after terrorists in the name who use Islam in their name, we were not going after Muslims was critical. Obviously, Obama did the same thing. And it was on steroids. I mean, the activities in the Obama administration to puncture the idea of us versus them, the idea that we're reaching out a hand as Americans with mutual interest and mutual respect, policy decisions that were crafted very carefully to make sure that the bad guys did not have the upper hand in designing and building off of that horrific narrative of the West is incompatible with Islam. The West was at war with Islam, that Islam is incompatible with democracy, that you can't be a real Muslim if you're living in the West. All these things that an ISIS or an AQ or the Taliban, pick your horrible group, would use in the name of what their ideology is. So I want to state that in this school of policy so that we are understanding on the critical side, not just the emotional side, what had to be done to put a stake in the ground. You may not like the US foreign policy in Afghanistan or Iraq, pick your country. But I'm making a different point here. And I want to amplify it by also saying something else to your point, Dalia. I could not agree with you more about the disintegration of the coalitions that were built after 9/11. That while you may have a difference of opinion in foreign policy or domestic policy, that you as an American should, as a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim or a Hindu or a Sikh or a Jain, pick your heritage. understand that there is common ground to fight hate. And those coalitions are in disrepair. Nobody has used the word trust yet, so I'm going to say that. The trust has been diminished. Generationally, I think that there is a difference between, there's no example now. Tell me what the examples are for Gen Z to say, oh, we want to do it like that. Who are the leaders who are showing you how to disagree well?
To model constructive dialogue.
I mean, where is that? So for me, as I look at this issue, having worked on this day in and day out since 9/11, I can tell you that I want it to come from our government. I want it to come from our local leaders. I want it to come from our business leaders. I want it to come from civil society leaders. I want it to come from you. And I know and you know that every single person makes a difference in the way you treat somebody, in how you think about somebody. And the idea that you cannot disagree well is mind-blowing to me, because we all know how to do that. We all know how to do that. And it doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that you agree with a particular stance in a foreign policy decision or a domestic policy decision, but what it means is if we don't do it, what Dalia has described in terms of the way our country is going, it will get even worse than it is today. So the reason why 9/11 is important and why I have been, is that there are lessons to be learned from that experience and from the October 7th experience that should show us a way forward that says we have to build trust, even though it's difficult. We have to find ways to make baby steps towards the other. And we have to do it now. Because if you're waiting for somebody else to suddenly give a grand speech and change the game, it's not going to happen. It's going to require things happening in classrooms, around your dining room table, with your friends on a Saturday night.
So I appreciate the point, especially steering us towards policy, because in the policy school here, we're training our students to be the next generation of leaders in this space. And just to give you a sense of some of the conversations I'm having with my students, and I'm curious to see how you would advise our students, also given your positionalities, right? So our students mean well, they care about the world. They're very much, from all across the spectrum. They have different opinions of what's gone, let's say, on in terms of October 7th. And they sometimes approach policy from a social activism perspective, right? And some might say, and the concern among some students is that, from whatever viewpoint you have, is that if you want a career in policy, there might not be room for social activism. So while you're committed to public service, are you really committed to positions where you're going to have to, and I don't want to say compromise on your social justice ideals, but basically navigate those in a different way, if you may. I mean, so I guess the question is, can you be an activist in public policy, number one? So that's sort of the first question. But also there is a sense, an ongoing sense among our students, or at least some of them, that we know well how to talk about some topics, but we don't know how to talk about others. And this question of how we talk about Palestine after October 7th is one that's causing, I think, a lot of different communities a lot of stress, right? Because to your point, if you're pro-Palestinian, that means you're could be potentially anti-Semitic. This is where we're going, the black and white. And if you're pro-Israel, that means you're Islamophobic or anti-Muslim or anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian. And there used to be a time and age, and I know I don't want to keep on talking about the good old days, because when I was there, I didn't think they were good old days, but there was a time where you could talk about, yeah, I'm pro-Palestinian, I'm pro-Israeli, I want a two-state solution, and we're all on the same side. Talk about the coalitions, and we're no longer in that world. So how should we advise our students to talk about this in a way where potentially it leads to greater just understanding and not necessarily contribute to the weaponization of these tropes, because that's what the political environment around us is already doing, and maybe doing it irresponsibly as well.
So on the first one, the first part, the activism versus being in policy. So 2011 to 2013, during the Arab Spring, I was invited to give like briefings at the State Department and things like that. And I met some of the most principled people I have ever met. They don't have a Twitter account. They don't have a Facebook page. They don't have a lot of publications. I met some of the most principled people on the democracy desk, on the Middle East desk, working towards real understanding, asking really deep, thoughtful questions, wanting to know the path forward for post-Arab Spring states, talking about things like military coups, and knowing the Egyptian constitution, for example. Egypt is what I was working on, much deeper than I did even, right? I met some of the most principled people I have ever met in government. I don't know how we're defining activism today, but it's not simply the rah-rah wearing all of my emotions on my sleeve. That has a place. I'm not talking against that. I'm just saying the way we have narrowly defined activism is just this kind of space, but you can be fundamentally a deep believer in the value of democracy and working towards making real change in government, right? So again, I'm not going to accept the kind of, it's either this or that. Everyone has a role to play, right? So we're not going to knock whatever anyone's doing. But again, in terms of some of the most principled individuals I've ever met, they were at the State Department, right? And so I want us to kind of have that in the bigger picture. I tell my students all the time, like, my dream is you all sit for the Foreign Service exam and go throughout the world representing the United States. And that's how we're going to talk about a deeper conversation on change. And again, yes, I mean, President Obama said it to everyone: don't have a social media account, right? You're right now, your job is to learn as much as possible, right? We're here to be real critical thinkers. And for some reason, we expect everyone to have a deep opinion at the age of 11 and to go fight for it, right? Instead of trying to really understand all of the nuances of the world. In the olden days, when we talked about what the university was for, what this space was for, this is where we actually have these deep, difficult conversations, right? This is where we have these deep, difficult conversations. This is where we say, okay, let's have messy, uncomfortable conversations here so that we can walk through them, so we can go out into the world with the deeper understanding, right? Unfortunately, this has become an exception and not the rule in university spaces, right? Where we're almost afraid to have deep conversations, messy conversations, maybe even make mistakes in what we're saying, use the wrong vocabulary because we don't understand the words that we've been taught to use incorrectly. And my fear is that we've now entered into spaces within academia where we can't have difficult conversations. We can't have honest conversations. Students can't bring their messiness of understanding, their incomplete understanding. It's like, look, I hear this and I hear this, and I know I'm good, but I just want to ask this deep question. And unfortunately today, we're almost closing these doors for them to have these conversations. And if we can't have them in these spaces, then where are we gonna have them, right? If we can't have deep, messy conversations in the academy, then how do we expect folks to graduate and to have conversations outside, which, are going to really be a bit more dangerous, right? Because they're going to have kind of the seal of university degree, but not the deep, critical messiness of conversations that led to learning. I'm teaching a course right now on Islam and democracy, and yesterday we had a class on sexuality and democracy, and students were really uncomfortable. And I said, look, that feeling of discomfort, it's because something that you hold is being challenged.
Yeah.
It's okay to be very uncomfortable, right? Because one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to say, wait, I took this assumption for granted, but now I know why I believe it, which is fine. Or this assumption I took for granted maybe is kind of not true. In both cases, you're learning. And that's why we're here. And so it's actually okay to sit with discomfort. And unfortunately today, we don't want any discomfort. And the byproduct of refusing to be uncomfortable is an attack on learning.
Thank you for that, Dalia. And at least if I may plug in the school, we're very much committed to having the difficult conversation under the rubric of constructive dialogue. So stay tuned. All right.
I loved that.
But
I love Really, really was. Um, if you are interested in being a policymaker in the US government, and being somebody who is around the final tables that make policy, you've got to play the game. That means you need to be excellent at what you do. You need to know your history. You need to be a great analyst. You need to know how to write, and you need to know how to make your case in a dignified and diplomatic way. Sometimes, most of the time, yes. So fundamental, be the person, like come to the game ready to play, okay? Secondly, I think this idea of that you cannot advocate for something, and I'm going to use that definition in terms of being for something while you are not marching in the streets as a policymaker. There are different kinds of roles for getting something done. Some are marching in the streets. Some are putting pressure through philanthropy to get an NGO to do something. Some is business doing, I mean, there are many different tools in the toolbox to push you towards a policy decision that happens. All of you guys know this. Some of you might be interested in law, and you're going to go that route and push policy through the legal things. But if you're interested in diplomacy, and you're interested in the world, and you're interested in the American position around Farahstan, and you think that Farah is not doing what she should be doing, and we have a role to play because there are critical minerals in Farahstan that we want to go after, and you got to learn how to be the diplomat that knows how to advocate for that policy. And you do that by working with teams of people to make the points that you've made. You need to have gone to Farahstan to understand what it is, spend some time there, get to know the people in that place. You cannot just be in an ivory tower looking down. So when I say this, it's not because I don't think you should have an opinion about something and that you don't come to the table with something really active inside of you. But I know firsthand that in being a member of a policy team in the US government, it sometimes is uncomfortable to hear the things that you are going to hear during the discussions. It may make you really uncomfortable. But the way policy is made in government, from the bottom up, all the way up, through the different committees, and how you do it within the interagency, is you advocate for your position. And if you advocate well and you make your point, it's pushed to the next level. And then it goes through again and again. It is not a perfect system. There are lots of mistakes. Sometimes something swoops in from that you did not expect to have happen. But the grounding is what you said. The people that are doing policy believe in our nation and what is in the Constitution. We believe in democracy. We believe in fundamental values. Do we always play the best game we can play? No. Do we make mistakes? We sure do. Are they critical mistakes sometimes? Yes. Does it sometimes make you think, my gosh, how can I be part of this? For some, it means that they walk away. So your answer is not an easy one. It is, you have to understand who you are and what your own red lines are to how you want to be and how you want to exist. For me, as I was around those policy tables, I was not always comfortable. Sometimes I was really uncomfortable. But you know what? I had a voice at those policy tables. And I was turned to ask to give my opinion. Did everybody always listen to me? No, of course not. But that's not the way the world works. But was I able to advocate for something? Was I able to make my case? Was I able to go in front of the Secretary of State and sometimes even at the National Security Council at a very high level to be able to say, you're missing this. Have you thought about that? I'll tell you, even when I was at USAID, during the worst of the worst, during what was happening in Iraq, I remember, I was not that senior, okay? I remember having a conversation with the administrator of AID. And I can't tell you what it was, But he was asking for ideas on something, and I was sort of looking around thinking nobody's going to say it. So I told Andrew Natsios what I thought. And he stopped the meeting and he said, that is a really great idea. Why aren't we doing that? No, it's not because I'm brilliant. It's because I just happened to, but my point is, if I wasn't in the room, that thing wouldn't have gone forward, right?
Right.
There are reasons to be at the table. Many, many, many reasons to be at the table. No, it's not for everybody. That's the point. It is not for everybody. Find your way to navigate the thing that you want to do in policy.
Thank you so much for that. And yes, this is what we want people not to lose faith in public service
Right.
and policy careers, especially at these times. So we have 5 minutes. We need to open up for questions. We can go on and on. This has been a really wonderful conversation. Let's start with questions. Over here.
Question.
Yes. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Linda Kahn. I'm a 1976 graduate of the Woodrow Wilson School of Government, which really dates me. Messy question. October 7th occurred. Babies' heads were decapitated. Women were raped. People were murdered in the most brutal ways. They were tied together and burned alive. I could go on, but I won't. 5,000 people crossed the border for purposes of driving into Israel and annihilating it. Where were the Arab voices afterwards, the Muslim voices afterwards, condemning it? Where were they? If you want to build coalitions with Jews, I'm Jewish, there should have been some voices very loud and very clear. Since that time, where have the Arab voices been, the Muslim voices been, saying what was done with the billions of dollars that were poured into Palestine, into Gaza? Billions of dollars over the years since 2005. What was done with that money? 450 miles of tunnels built. Gaza is 25 miles long and 6 miles wide. There are 450 miles of tunnels under Gaza.
Okay, Linda.
There are hostages being captured. Where
Yeah, we got, so this is a very good question. Should we respond or take other questions?
Can we take a couple more?
Yeah. Over here, yes.
I'm here locally. And thank you very much for bringing forward this important subject and with all the sensitivity it deserves.
No, it's working.
My question, I am uncomfortable. I was here present as a local person watching the demonstrations in around Mather Sundial and on Nassau Green, and hearing the chants of Allahu Akbar, which resonates for many of us older people as a war cry as much as a religious injunction. The question I want to ask is, how do we differentiate between Islamophobia, I don't have a fear of Islam, and Islamistophobia? I do have a fear of Islamists, of radical Islam. A lot of what you're talking about seems to be derived from what people are seeing and understanding, and as the good friend here is invoking here, as to what's happening in the lands of Islam, right? Not very democratic, not very peaceful, at least to our impressions. And radical Islam has a very distinct agenda, which seems very contrary to the kind of civility that we're talking about. So my question to you is, how much of the Islamophobia, which we decry, is actually being fueled by or is indeed Islamistophobia, if I may be precise?
Thank you. Thank you for that. And we'll just take this question here, and please, I think right here next, yeah.
I'm also a local member of the community. Unfortunately, I'm not a graduate of this great university. My question is to the two academics on the panel. Why exactly is it that you cannot have uncomfortable, messy conversations within the academy, within places like this? Is it, I mean, very, very literal and practical about it. Is it because it's incumbent on faculty to provoke those discussions precisely to sort of encourage uncomfortable discussions and thereby help train the next generation of students in that part of the discipline? Is it because we live in an overall culture which is so averse to having where we're bending over backwards to try and agree very superficially with, I'm trying to get at the heart of what that's.
Thank you so much. So I'll let our panelists,
Just ask if a student has a question before we end.
yeah, are there any student questions?
Oh, surprised.
All right.
Oh, classes. Got you.
Yeah. So just because we're not hearing things doesn't mean people aren't saying them. Just because condemnations are not making the news doesn't mean there haven't been condemnations. Just because there is a document put out, 600 pages of condemnations. Just because condemnations are not heard doesn't mean they're not being said. And I'm not going to defend 1.6 billion Muslims here by talking about condemnations, right? So I actually think it's a disservice for us to begin every conversation with condemnations, right? We're going to assume that everyone's humanity is equally important. So again, just because condemnations are not heard doesn't mean they're not being. In terms of the discourse, I mean, this is, we know that the last three bastions of democracy are the media, the legal system, and the university, the academy. And the academy is critically important to democracy, right? It's where conversations begin. It's where conversations develop. It's where, we talk about civilization, right? But civilization is a reflection of the integrity of the academy, right? And so conversations are being had, and they should continue to be had. And the more difficult they are, the better the outcomes should be. And so I don't think they're not being had. I think they are being had, but perhaps we need to protect the continuation and to ensure that having difficult, messy conversations, perhaps without the right vocabulary until we actually can get there, is part of what it means to come to university, right? We come to university not to read books and get jobs. We come to university to learn how to think. We're not going to be able to learn how to think until we get really messy in our conversations. And a little bit of discomfort is actually really healthy in the process.
I'm looking at the time. I just wanted to say, echo what you said about equal humanity, first of all. I heard the same thing, ma'am, after 9/11, this call for voices to stand up. And, even after 9/11, when the 54 Muslim majority states in the world, nations in the world, stood up and made a statement at the OIC to say that violence in the name of Islam will not stand. Even when the Sheikh of Al-Azhar, even when all of the list of names that came forward, like if you could just get all these people to say something, it would be great. Even when all of that happened after 9/11, we still had AQ doing what it did. We still had ISIS being reborn. I'm all for people standing up in the name of violence. Absolutely 100%. Hamas, Hezbollah, whatever you were referring to, okay? I'm very clear that the way we absorb culture means that we are seeing things from a perspective that doesn't actually always encompass everyone. And I would urge everyone to have a wider lens as you read to your question about the Islamists who are using violence in the name of Islam. There are more Muslims that live outside of the Middle East than in it. In the year 2050, the most populous nation of Muslims on earth is where, sir? No. No. Thank you. We have got to get our head around demographics globally and what it means to be a particular faith. We don't do that to Christians. We don't do that to Jews, and we shouldn't do it to Muslims either.
Thank you for that. And I want to wrap it up. I just want to say one point on the condemnation, if I may, just to chime in. And I didn't want to end on that point because I do believe that this issue of condemnation really does feed into different tropes. Yep. And Muslims are systematically singled out to be condemning things that other groups are never asked to condemn. if a Christian nationalist does something in the name of Christianity, we don't expect every Christian to apologize for it. If a Jewish person does something in the name of Jewish nationalism, we don't expect every Jewish person to apologize for it. After 9/11 and after October 7th, I personally just want to say, and this is where I think where we have to be very careful, because this can perpetuate just the hate and the justification for hate. Every single Muslim organization in America after 9/11 condemned 9/11, and it was on their websites. I could be invited to go give a talk about the weather, which I'm not an expert on the weather. And before I started, somebody in the audience would say, do you condemn 9/11 first? In other words, we're not going to give you, as an academic at Princeton, the right to speak until you condemn 9/11 because you looked suspicious. You look Muslim. So for the next year, what I did was, before I started talking, I would stand up and I say, just for the record, I condemn 9/11. Can I now speak? And similarly, I don't think my children should have to apologize for October 7th. It is horrific, and I have condemned it publicly, and I still get emails about, you have not condemned it, although I have condemned it. But I don't think my children have to condemn something that Hamas did that they had nothing to do with. They were horrified. This idea that Muslims and Arabs are complicit with Hamas and horror and violence and terrorism is false. And this is what we were trying to do. So at least I want to make sure we end on that note, because by leaving this as the justification for hatred, is that these people are bad, is not where we wanted to end. Similarly, we have a lot of Christian nationalists, Jewish nationalists, perpetrating isms that are very anti-democratic and uncomfortable, but we don't ask all Christians to apologize for it, or we're not suspicious of them. We have to look at our common humanity together as communities. Thank you for that. A big resounding round of applause for our guests. And thank you so much. Really appreciate it.